Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Barn Table Talks. I'm your host, Benji Bonnet, here with my co-hosts, Travis Corman and Andrew Fansler. Big shout out to Experience Ag and Land Pros again for sponsoring and keeping this going. Our guest today is Jordan Caldwell, which we'll get into more of a nitty and gritty with him. He's got an interesting story we're going to hear about, but we're going to jump into the icebreaker question like we always do. So, guys, today the question is, if you could take one prop from any movie set and keep it in your house, what prop is that and why? And I don't know who wants to start.
I'm not starting on this.
You don't want to start this time?
Movie guys.
Andrew?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I would say something that would be fun, wouldn't fit in the house, but something that would be fun is the van from the movie Dumb and Dumber. Ooh. And it would be awesome to have that and just cruise around town in it. And
not expecting that answer.
To get some looks, man. Get some looks. You know,
was anybody expecting
that's
that?
Part of the fun, right? How cool would that be?
That would be pretty cool.
I would say that, or maybe Spicoli's van from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. One of the two. I'd go for either. Travis, what do you got?
Oh man, I'm going to have to wait a second. We're going to see you parked in a van down by the river. It's Dalton. The river farm, here we come.
Oh yeah, just keep the mustard out of it.
Oh, I don't have a clue yet. I don't have many movies I watch.
Come on now, this is part of the fun.
Give me two more times here.
Okay, I know which one I want. So, and I think I would actually use this. I'd keep it in my house, but I'd use it. Happy Gilmore's putter.
Ooh,
I think that would be... It'd be cool to even use it on the golf course. Just tap it in. That's one of my favorite movies, so I'm going to have to go with the old hockey putter there. But
Jordan, what do you got?
I'm going to go with my favorite movie, Top Gun 2.
Oh, yeah.
And the jet, or the plane that he drives at the very beginning.
Okay.
That one. Yeah. Stealth one that he
Yes, the one with 10.3.
It won't fit in the house, but it'll be in the back.
That's awesome.
Oh, wow.
All right, Travis.
Pressure is on.
Gee whiz.
We got some great props here.
I know. The problem is, like, most of my stuff, the movies I like are all like military action, Hallmark, something like that. Yeah, Hallmark. I gotta watch all of those.
You could put a tank in your backyard,
right? Yeah, I think that I was not prepared for this
Come on,
question.
you're stalling us out.
I am buying time.
Caught him off guard.
You did. This is about one time you've done this, Timmy. I would probably have to say, something along those lines. I would think maybe one of the, you go back to some of the Civil War movies, stuff like that. I'd say like just even one of those flags that was like, the Patriots, something like that. Some of those things, like some of those, like when they hold their, their big battle flag up and stuff. That'd be pretty cool, just as a, what it stood for. I guess that's more of what mine is. Right. So not dog ears, I'd like the fighter jet, but what goes up goes down. So I don't know if I'd ever get brave enough to go up. So, and then the putter, I've seen my putting skills. So
yes,
I'm back.
Mine too.
I know.
They need work.
His nickname is Thor because he's such a good putter.
You could come hang out in my van with me. So
that's awesome. Good.
So we're lucky today. We got Jordan Caldwell with Caldwell's Inc. And, I've gotten to know Jordan over the years. And as I told you guys, he's a serial entrepreneur. He's a rock star of an entrepreneur. Jordan, thanks for coming, but take a little bit of time. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I want to hear how this all started.
Okay. So before Caldwell's Inc., we owned a company as a family called CGS, and my great-grandfather started it in the 1940s, and he actually started as a farm. Moved down from Newcastle and bought a piece of ground, got a great deal on it, and he wanted to start farming. And first year he farmed and couldn't produce anything, and found out why it was so cheap. It was full of gravel. And so he quickly had to come up with some money to make the payments. And back then, the counties paid the farmers to take care of the roads in front of their farms. So he was taking that gravel and spreading it on roads to make his bank payment. He had to, was forced to, but he loved farming. He wanted to farm. And so he continued to do that ratio year after year. And then when my grandfather got back from the war, he told my great-grandfather, hey, I want to stay and I want to help, but we gotta get serious about gravel. And while he was at war, he was on the construction crew. So he learned how to build roads and make asphalt. He said, we're going to start taking this gravel and we're going to make asphalt with it too. So that's what they did. They got portable pug mix plants, cold plants, and they would go around to every county and set up their plant and then haul the gravel in from the gravel pit and make cold mix roads.
That's interesting.
And that went on for a couple of years. And then the city of Shelbyville, the city of Rushville, the city of Greenfield's landfills were all filling up. And an inspector came out and said, hey, Paul, which was my grandfather's name, he said, what are you going to do with all these holes? And he said, I don't know. And he said, we're just fishing them right now. And he said, this would be a great spot for the next landfill for Tri-County here. And he thought about it. And back then you thought about what your son was going to do for you, which was my dad. And he thought that'd be a great idea for what he could do when he got out of high school. So he filed for a permit. And back then,
Nothing to get,
it was a
probably.
2-day process, and he was in landfill business.
Right.
Now my dad had something to do when he got out of high school.
Right.
So that's what they did. They got in the landfill business and slowly evolved into a trucking company, a recycling company, and then we in the early 90s we bought a hot mix plant, started making hot mix asphalt, and a Portlet company. When I graduated from high school, that was my first job. We had bought a Portlet company out of Rushville, and after graduation, I got in the Portlet truck and went and did Portlet route.
Right.
And it was probably one of the funnest jobs I ever had. But I grew up working at the landfill, running the equipment and running the hot mix plants before school. My job was to go in and check the plants out and help load them. And then I go to school, and then we co-op out after lunch, and I go back. But worked on the equipment, maintenance, all those things. And all through those years, we still farmed. We always had farm ground. And we had to own, as a landfill, you're growing, you got to own everything around you. So we had about 2,000 acres around our landfill at all times for buffer zones. And so it was only natural. But it was more of a hobby during that period.
Yep.
And then when I got back from college, I ran the hot mix plant for probably 4 years, and it was, to this day, was the best job I ever had to grow up, because you had production, you had customer service, you had sales, and you had maintenance. Those were all four of the main things that you need to learn how to do as a kid. And
That knew it all coming out of college.
that's right. Yeah. And so that was the best thing I ever did, was run that hot mix plant. And then slowly graduated to running the gravel pit, and then we'd run the landfill in the winter, and got into the trucking side of things, and took over. We started a specialty trucking division where we got into hauling semi-loads of anything. So things that nobody wanted to do, night loads, things like that. And liquid loads. So I was running that division, and then my brother decided to move on from the company. He was doing special waste. So then I naturally, in the family business, you don't hire anybody else. You just put it on the owner's son to do more.
Right.
And that's kind of how I grew up. So I started doing special waste too. And that's where I started learning about composting and what people were doing with organics, because it was a competition to the landfill.
Right.
So we're bidding on these jobs to get this stuff to come into our solidification pit or our landfill. And I'm losing to these people that have compost facilities or digesters, and they're charging more than me, which that intrigued me. I never forgot that. So fast forward a couple more years, 2017, we as a family decided to sell the company, and we sold the company to Advanced Disposal. And part of that deal, when we sold out, was a family member had to stay for 2 years to transition the customers and the employees. And they gave me, goals to have to reach.
And you got signed up for that.
Yeah, I was the sorry son of a gun that had to do it.
Right.
But I really at the time I hated it, because I only had one person to answer to my whole life.
Right.
And now I had 14 people to answer to and didn't know any of them. But it was the best thing that ever happened to me. From a career base, from an experience base, I learned how to report. I learned how to present. I did more performers in 2 years than I ever had in my life.
Right.
But I learned how to do it the right way. I learned what they were good at, what they weren't good at, and what I wanted to take from them. And then after my agreement was done, I gave them a heads up, hey, I was leaving, and they said, what are you going to go do? And I said, well, we'll go farm, and but I want to do something else too. And I knew I was going to start a composting facility. I just didn't tell them that. And they said, why don't you do all of our semi work? We don't want to do the semi work. We want to sub all the semi work out, which was in my background. They knew I ran the specialty trucking division. And I said, okay. And I signed a contract with them, and I went out and bought 10 semis and started doing all their semi work for them. And so that's what started the semi work. And I had it. Now they also put a non-compete on me when they did that, which was smart, which I didn't care. I didn't care at the time because I needed something else to do, not just farm. And so I signed it, and that's kind of how and why I went into the semi world of things. And then I filed for a compost permit, land application permit, the day one I quit. And I had 0 customers. I at the time I didn't own any land. I was renting land, and I rented the worst piece of ground from my dad because it was the only thing I could afford. And it just happened to be right next to landfill, and it had no drainage. We couldn't even farm it. It wasn't farmable. And my dad still overcharged me, by the way. But it didn't matter because I didn't have anything else, so I had to do it. We got that started, and we worked. I was driving a truck and doing cold calls while I was in the semi. And at night, in the evenings, and on weekends, we were building the compost facility. And we started out with just a dirt pad, and we soil stabilized it because that's all I could afford at the time. And our first customer was Kroger. We got milkshakes. I got 1 load a week of milkshakes. And as I'm calling to get more customers, I quickly found out that I needed a packaging facility. Everybody had packaged food waste, not bulk. I wanted bulk because it's easier.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so I call IDEM, I go up there and meet with them, and I'm like, hey, I want to put a depackager on this compost facility. Like, no, you can't. You got to have a solid waste facility processing permit. So it took another year to get that, and I sub-rented a building from my dad's tenant. So I had to call him. He's from California, and I made a deal that I could just rent a 5,000 square foot area from him because I couldn't afford to build one, and my dad wasn't going to kick him out. So that's how I started at the depackaging facility, and we had no customers, but we started getting 1 load a week in, then it was 2 loads a week, and you fast forward now to today, we're getting around 20 semi-loads a day in our depackaging facility, and we get around, and that process, we get in anything from Walmart, so anything that doesn't sell at Walmart. So you think about the vegetables, the fruits, the meats, anything that expires and goes out the back door food-wise comes to my facility in the central Indiana. 60 Sam's Club and Walmart locations. All the Kroger manufacturing facilities in this region come to my facility, get depackaged. And we run 2 crews. So we have 4 on days, 3 on nights. And after that process, it goes through a machine. It's like think of a mill with a screen below it, and it's pressing it and it's breaking it up. And when it falls through, it's organic liquid slurry, and it goes into a pit, and that pit gets pumped out anywhere from 4 to 8 times a day, semi-loads, 5,000 gallon loads, and it goes through a screening process to screen out any plastics, and then it goes into a vac tanker, and then from there it goes to the compost facility. So when it goes to the compost facility, it then gets mixed with carbon products. So horse manure from the horse tracks, corn shucks from the back of the combine. We collect them with a self-loading forage wagon. Wood chips. Wood chips come from the wood waste at our transfer stations. We blend that with it too. And then we also use finished compost to go into it too, because it's already hot and has the microbes already in it.
Yep.
So we'll mix that slurry together, and then we go out onto our pad and we windrow it, and we're turning it once a week for 6 to 8 weeks. After that 6 to 8 weeks, it then has to go into a curing pile for an additional 30 days. Curing, it's allowing it to calm down. So while it's out there on the pad, it's going to be between 130 and 160 degrees. and you don't want to go below it, and you don't want to go above it.
Well, and so that's one of the things that it really kind of always interested me too was, you think, well, I'm going to compost, right? I'm just going to throw all this stuff together and let it go sit. Well, what I've learned over time, with getting to go to the site and learn a little bit about it, it's an art. I mean, there is a complete science behind, you can't get too much of this. You can't have too little of that. You can't get it too hot. It can't be this cold. I mean, it has to be perfect or you have a complete failed product, which that is one of the things too that I think just impresses me and excites me when I see this is the amount of science and stuff that went into it, especially from a guy that started this driving a semi. I mean, that's just crazy. Like, how did he become a chemist while he was running around on an 18-wheeler, probably with a headset on, making sales calls?
You hope it was a headset, right?
Yeah.
For sure it was a headset.
Yes, sir, it was.
So over the years, are you just learning on the go?
Oh, yeah.
How
it was trial by error. And I made a mistake. I should have gotten a mentor right out the gate. And my first headache that I ran into was our ponds. So we have retention ponds that the pads drain off into. And I didn't realize, if you think about it now, all that food waste and liquids, because it rains, it's going to go in the retention pond, and then we recycle that water back. Well, what happened was the ponds went anaerobic because of the food. The BODs took all the oxygen. Well, I didn't know. I had no idea. And it was like pond. It was like the biggest odor bomb ever went off. And man, I had everybody calling me. I don't think I slept for at least 6 months. And I mean, I was at that point, I'm calling everybody, trying to figure out what to do. And what I ended up finding was a wastewater treatment guy that came out, real nice guy. He came out and showed me how to, you got to put oxygen back in it. You got to put bugs in it. You got to do this. Your pH is going to be at a 7 at all times. And quickly did that. And it took a year to get that fixed. And then I learned about balance with the windrows, and the balance starts at the depackaging facility. So when I get Gatorade in, he goes in one row, and then I get tequila and it goes in here, and then I get sugars. Like I get all the Wrigley gum and the powder that makes it. I get maple syrup in, and then we blend all those things. So you don't just go put all the maple syrup in there. You take one of each thing,
and blend it,
and you make a mix design. It's like making cake.
But when you're depackaging this stuff, it's not like you're just throwing it all in. The cardboard's going over here, the plastics are going over here. So every bit of the product that comes into you is recycled.
We recycle everything that we can as long as it's not over contaminated.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge. We used to put everything in the depackaging machine and it would contaminate everything. Now we're using the same amount of people and we're pulling stuff out of the boxes so we can recycle the cardboard.
When you explain you're over-contaminated, what may label it as over-contaminated?
So since the Chinese soared, and that's when China cut us off from recycling, they got really picky. And if there is anything on that cardboard or plastic of food, it's considered contaminated.
Really?
Pizza box at one time was considered.
Really?
If it had cheese on it,
and they wouldn't take it, right?
Really?
Now it's gotten a little bit better since we've started building mills here in the U.S. So that's something that we fight, with our material that we're going to recycle.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's Andrew's right. It's a good point that we are trying to pull everything out of there. So if we have a 20-ton load come in, we're gonna recycle. The organics is going to be about 80% of it. And then any cardboard is going to be another 5 to 7%. And then the leftover is what's going to either go to the incinerator or the landfill, whatever.
So you got about 15% waste on a load.
Yeah.
Essentially something like
And
that.
our goal is to get it into single digits.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're motivated to do that.
Yeah.
It saves and makes us money.
Right.
And then once we get it to compost, we want to blend all those carbon products that I just told you about because it gives us a better product, right? Some of them have more potash, some of them have phosphorus.
Do you have a target audience for your product then?
Well, for the last 4 years, it's been me.
That doesn't pay very well.
Well, and like that's one of the things.
It doesn't.
So let's back up. You're cruising up and down the road on a semi. Of course, you got your headset on. You're talking to people. And at what point does it click in your head that, I can vertically integrate this farm along with this trucking to get this compost thing going, and then I can actually spread this back on our fields and eliminate buying fertilizer products?
So that was known when I filed for my compost permit. I knew that's what I wanted to be vertically integrated. And because that's how I grew up. I always had a landfill. We always had a trucking company. We had a gravel pit. We had an asphalt plant. So that's all vertical integration.
Yeah.
That's all I knew. And I knew that in order to be competitive with these other people, you had to have that end disposal facility, which was the compost facility, which then I can put it on our farm fields, reduce our synthetics, and then eventually sell it to other people once we have the abundance. And that abundance just happened this year, where we finally had enough to start selling. But I also was working on quality at the same time. I wanted to make sure it worked.
When you finally sold it, you wanted it to be a quality product.
That's right.
Right. Yeah.
And that's where we finally got to this year. So after the curing process, we now we're screening it. So we want to get the big wood chips out of there, any rocks that happen to go in there, and any other contaminant that might have fell in there. So at this point now, it's 1/2 inch minus.
Yeah.
And it looks like powder.
Yeah.
And it looks like soil. And,
So back to you said when you started, you had just that small area of stabilization to windrow this on.
right.
So I take it today it's changed, right?
Right. So 2 years in this, if you've ever soil stabilized ground, it only lasts for so long. And I had to make a decision. At the time the pad was an acre big, and we were growing, we were starting to see success, and I had to make a decision to put more money into it. And what we're going to do? Are we going to stabilize it again? And I decided that, hey man, I'm in it to win it. I'm not backing down. So I started concreting the whole thing, and we worked in the evenings, we worked at nights, and then we just started cubing them up and making it. And now we have a 4-acre concrete. We just finished it up this year, pad. So it's a lot better. It's a lot more productive, and quality goes back to quality.
Yeah.
Like clean product.
Right.
So now our whole facility at our compost is 109 acres. It's sewn up for 109 acres. And
So when you look at that, your facility from where it was day one to where it is today, obviously you're seeing benefits in this composting. You're seeing the compost is kind of what I'm going to call the finished product of the vertical integration.
Right.
And you found that's a real positive to the farming operation. Obviously, probably from an ROI standpoint, it probably helps the farm a lot. And now I have read where people are starting to run some type of machine. I think they call it an extract machine. Do you have any experience with that?
so we have one.
Okay.
And so we make compost extract. We just bought it this year, and I ran by it on YouTube, just watching, because that really was my education on this.
YouTube.
On compost and depackaging, I would. Some people go home and watch Game of Thrones. I go home and watch YouTube videos on compost, man. I ran into this just by chance. This guy out in Kansas, he's just a regular farmer, and he started doing it, and I was like, man, I think I can do it. So I bought one of these machines, and what you do is you just take the finished compost, and you can put in additives like fish food and some other things into it, and just think of a round cylinder that has a screen on it. You put it in, you fill it up with water, and it aerates, and it aerates for 20 minutes, and then you open a valve at the bottom, and it flows through, and it goes through filters, and that is now your starter for your planter.
And there's low salt content.
Correct. So
It's not hot.
So we then take that material, compost extract, and we were using it as our starter. So I cut out all my synthetic starter this year, cold turkey, everything. I'm all in.
Big move. Yeah.
I'm all in.
Right.
Yep.
And
But it worked.
It did. So what happens is that goes in, and we put it in furrow on the seed, and it makes that seed think that it is in the most fertile soil it's ever seen in its life. And it's like giving it steroids, and it just shoots those roots down 4 times faster than a synthetic starter.
Yeah.
Now, we did see through the process, that first couple months, that corn doesn't look as good, like from a green standpoint.
Well, that's kind of concerning at first.
It was. My stomach, I stopped driving by the fields because I was like, man, this didn't work. But, what we found out was the starter worked and it was okay, but it was more of a feel good. It made the crop look green, but it wasn't helping or paying off at the end with the bushel count, which is what really matters. And the extract held its own, and we didn't go backwards.
So then after you extract, right, the product that was in there, do you put that back out to remix with compost?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you haven't lost any product.
Nothing. Wow. Nothing.
Which is, you're just, that's even better.
That full cycle.
Your organics and stuff like that, I guess your microbiology of your actual soil, have you seen that? Have you been measuring that going up? Like that's got to be increasing. I mean,
we have raised our organic matter. We've got a field that has raised 1% every year.
That's incredible too. That's a huge amount.
Almost impossible.
That's a huge amount.
You can't do that synthetically.
That's a huge amount.
Now, obviously, I have an advantage, right? I have my own compost, so I can put extra out there,
right?
Which I do. But when you look at my test results of my compost, you're not going to be blown away from. There is potash, there is phosphorus, there is nitrogen there, but it's the organic matter and the microbials that are in there. So organic matter is between 28 and 30%. I mean, it's a soil amendment, is what it is. Matter of fact, I just spread it on my house yard yesterday. So, and that's how much I believe in it.
Wow.
Yeah,
I put it everywhere.
I'm sure your wife loves seeing that going through
She
the
loves it. Yeah, she doesn't care.
So
she was at work. She didn't know.
do you see this being a future thing for like other farmers too?
Absolutely.
Something big that they're gonna start getting into and seeing the benefit of? Is this where it's heading?
I think so. And where I'm going, the next step for me is right now, one of my competitors is digesters. They can take in bulk liquid waste, liquid organics cheaper than I can because I just told you my process, my equipment, everything. They're taking it in, they're extracting the methane, converting it into RNG.
We were in Europe. Remember that we went to that farm? They had their own methane plant set up on the farm itself.
Yep.
And yeah, that was exactly so interesting.
So they make their money selling carbon credits and selling energy. Both.
Carbon credits was an afterthought compared to what it used to be. Right. It used to just be the methane.
Yeah.
So I've been working on a digester for 3 years. So that's how long this process started. I went and got a quote. The first quote was $10 million. And I thought, I can.
I'll wait.
I think I can do that. And then the second quote was 20.
Yeah, I should have waited.
I kind of cocked my head on that one. And then the third one was closer to $60 million. And
I should have done it at 10.
Yeah. Then I realized I needed a partner.
Yeah.
And the more I got into it, the development of a digester is way over my head. And so I did. I went out and got a partner, and we've got our zoning done. It's going to be at the compost facility. And we're going through tax abatement right now, and with the hope of starting construction next year. So what that's going to do, for me anyways, for my company, is, I get to truck it, right? So I get more trucking for my trucks. But also digesters can do things cheaper than a compost. So I'm going to be able to go out and be more competitive where I need to be competitive.
Right.
And then I'm going to get the back end of that material. So the company that's building it, they get the carbon credits, they get the sales off the gas, but then I get the liquid digestate on the back end.
Yeah.
And then I get the solid digestate on the back end because there's 2 different products. And then we'll take that solid digestate and then we'll compost it too.
Yeah.
And we're still going to get other materials in that the digester can't take.
Right.
Very sensitive.
Right.
You can only give it the right stuff. It's no different than our stomach, right? It goes back to a balance.
But like that liquid that comes out, you can just treat that like a hog manure or dairy manure, to where you can just knife it in with a drag line.
That's correct.
Super efficient, right?
That's correct.
That's awesome.
And that liquid digestate is better than cattle manure or dairy manure or any of that stuff. That's how good it is.
Because most of the manure, it's been the efficiencies in the feed quality and what they're trying to produce with these animals anymore. There's not much waste, and that's reflected all the way through their system. So you don't have as much coming back out the other end that you can reuse. Am I correct in saying that? Yeah. So yeah. So
and that stuff's ready to go. So it's already been digested, no pun intended.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so those microbials are live and ready to go.
Yeah.
They're hot.
They're hot.
Ready to work.
That's right.
So when you look at this on your farm, we've talked about how you got the vertical integration. Now you're talking about spreading the dry stuff. We're talking about you're going to have liquid in the future. What do you feel like, other than just an ROI, what do you feel like this is going to do for you and your family as time goes on building the farm operation?
Well, I think it gives us a head start. It puts us ahead of where we're going. I toured a building the other day, and it was an old fertilizer building, and it had metal beams, and the metal was all corroded out, looked terrible. The wood, the concrete's ate up from the fertilizer. And it made me think that's what the synthetic fertilizer is doing to our soil.
Right.
It's doing the same thing.
Yep.
It's chewing up steel and it's chewing
I'm
up
just telling you in
concrete.
Flintstone form here. I don't have all the, the PhD to tell you what it's really doing, but it's locked up the soil and the microbials and the natural stuff. And what our material does is it goes in there and it naturally unlocks it.
Yep.
Every year we unlock a little bit more and a little bit more, which then allows me to decrease my 28. I've decreased my 28 by 30%, and my yields have still continued to increase.
So Jordan, I know this spring, I happened to be up in Morristown, and I was driving, and I saw this field of cover crops, and I thought, oh my God, this is the best field of wheat I've ever seen, but how did it get so far along? And happened to talk to you the next few days, and you told me those were just cover crops that you had planted, but you'd spread all the compost on there, and the cover crops just took off. I mean, I almost felt bad, like, how's he even going to plant this?
How's he going to kill this?
Because it was phenomenal. But it came back to me thinking vertical integration. Now we're incorporating cover crops. He's no-tilling, and it's like, man, this is the absolute perfect scenario for the future of agriculture.
Right.
And
Now, with that being said, it's probably not everybody's going to have the same budget to be able to put this on farm.
Right.
Like to that piece, you're not going to see this popping up on every farm.
But what I think we as a farmers want to see is we want to see facilities like Jordan's continue to grow. I mean, he already understands it. And then he's going to have a great product that's going to be local. It's going to be something that's saving our landfills. And, we get to put it back out and get rid of fertilizer. Like, you can't get any better than that.
Right. And that was where I was going with it. Is our goal is to make a good product to sell to our local farmers. Mm-hmm. And we want to teach the FFAs and the 4-H's. We want them to come out and be a part of this process so these young men and women know about it. So then they can take that on to their farms that they work on.
Well, and that's a great point right there. The consolidation of ag's been happening big time over the last 40 years. And we've seen it in so many different areas. We're seeing it more in the grain farm side now. And the one thing I've noticed is there's just not enough youth that are being educated in the ag world. And you don't have to come back and take over, the family farm. There's so many things to do in ag that the education's still important. And I feel like that even in rural areas, we've got, I think, fairly good FFAs, but we still need to promote the youth. We still need to do that.
Yeah, there's a lack of education of what's available in ag. Right.
Yeah,
everybody thinks they're going to go back and have to farm.
Right.
And that's so much bigger than that.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you look at all these big industries that are even just in the state of Indiana, and ag comes back to ag's the number one industry. You look at from a revenue standpoint, ag is number one. And when Jordan mentioned that just there, it kind of hit me in a soft spot. Is how do we continue to educate these kids? How do we get them back? How do we help them understand that there are other areas? You can learn the science behind compost, and you're going to be every farmer's best friend.
Well, I think one way in doing that, and this is some of, we've talked about here, you got to get hands-on. Mm-hmm. What better way to learn?
Well, you mentioned Europe earlier. And back in 2007, I had the opportunity to go with Klaus on a tour to Germany. Got to tour some of their facilities, both ag and the other industries they're in. And that was one thing I noticed, and it was a big takeaway from the European culture, was they had basically schools within these companies. So you made it so far through school, and then you decided, I really want to go work for Klaus. You left school at that point, and you came to Klaus's school. And they not only trained you in, your ordinary subjects that you would learn in school, they also started giving you on-job training. They started saying, okay, I think you would be really good for this, you'd be really good for that. So, I think we ought to see more of that in the United States. Mm-hmm. I think it would be great to help benefit the future of ag.
So I had a question, because thinking on this personally, when I first heard of composting, I remember when I first seen it on like a TV show or something, and my initial thought was like, a bunch of hippies, putting a bunch of stuff in soil. And so what was your initial reaction when you first heard of composting? Do you remember, what was your thoughts on it? Were you like, oh man, this is immediately you knew you were going to be able to do something with it? Or were you kind of, on the edge on
He
it
was
there?
that hippie.
Were you
No, not the farthest thing from a hippie. Remember, I was back in the landfill world, so I saw, it was more of fierce competition.
Okay.
Now, so we always had yard waste coming in and grinding our yard waste, and we had horse manure coming in at the landfill. So I knew a little bit of that, but we were just using that for different things. We weren't actually windrowing it and turning it into a fertilizer back then. So it was competition, and we were doing a little bit of this. So I felt like I knew enough to be dangerous. Okay. But obviously, when I started finding out that they were charging more and still winning, that's when I was intrigued. I was like, that's what drove me to it.
Yeah. That's a good business model.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So like when you look at what you're doing today, you look at the farm, what developments do you see continuing to happen at Caldwell's in the future? So you talk about the digester.
Yep. So another side of our business now is roll-offs. So we have a roll-off company, and we also own and operate transfer stations. And one of the things, transfer station business, it's an okay business, but where you make money is you sort out material so it doesn't go to the landfill. It goes back to our recycle philosophy. We're trying to recycle and save airspace now. I was in the landfill business. Now I'm trying to keep stuff out of the landfill.
Right.
So when material comes into our transfer stations, our first thing we're looking for, selfishly, is wood waste. Right, untreated wood waste we're pulling out, and then we take that wood waste to our compost facility, and we grind it and we use it in our mix. Right. We've grown so much that we've got an abundance of wood waste, and one thing I know in the landfill business is they need sawdust to solidify special waste.
Yep.
So last week I went and bought a hammer mill. So I'm going to take the wood waste that I don't need in the compost, and I'm going to make sawdust, not only for solidification, but we're going to use it for animal bedding too.
Yep. Cool.
Now, from my understanding, animal bedding is a little bit more sensitive. Yep. They want a better product. But it's a good business to be in. And then what do you have to do, right? You have to truck that sawdust to that facility.
Yes.
So it's going to feed work to our semi side.
Back to vertical integration.
Wow. And then 4 years ago, I started another company called Caldwell Environmental. And there's a firewall in between the companies. And what they specialize in is industrial vac services. So when we can go into a Kroger manufacturing facility or a Kraft or Prego, and we go in there and clean out their tanks and their trenches. That's all food waste. And then it comes back and dumps at the compost facility. That company also does lab packing and hazardous waste hauling. And so that company gets all kinds of leads to throw back to Caldwell's Inc. So that's another way these two companies are growing together, but they're giving leads back and forth to continue to grow.
Do you sleep
Not very well. Not very
I see
well.
what Andrew was saying when he said you're a serial entrepreneur, because you got a lot. I mean, that's impressive. That's a lot going on.
Yeah, 5 years ago, we had one employee, and today we did payroll this week, and we had 145. Wow. So that's our growth pattern, and we're going to continue to grow. We're looking for opportunities every single day in whatever we can do that's going to make sense.
So if this afternoon you had the opportunity to go back and meet 20-year-old Jordan Caldwell, what advice would you give that 20-year-old today?
Be patient. Be patient, and just keep working hard, make good decisions, and surround yourself with good people. Mm-hmm. That's key. Networking and having good people around you to help you make good decisions or bring stuff to you.
Right. And so one of the comments you made early on, it sounds to me like your dad was a big influence in from a mentorship.
Yep.
Did you have any other mentors that you really felt like, I mean, you don't have to name them or single them out, but did you have other mentors that helped motivate you?
Oh, yeah.
Whether it be, in the business or out of the business, were there were other people?
Yes, there was. Dad was my number one, right? He was there the whole time. And he always ingrained just, you got to work every day. If you're going to run a business and be successful, you got to live it. Mm-hmm. You got to be there every day. You got to answer your phone when you don't want to answer your phone. You got to be ready to go at all times. I had a Christmas party 2 weeks ago, and we all stayed up too late. And 2 hours later, when I get home, my phone rings for an emergency cleanup at Bungie. So I called everybody, and we all went in 2 hours later. And
Middle of the night.
but that's the point of, you got to have your phone on at all times, and that's how we've grown our business, is just answering our phones and being there when people ask. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like you said, back to the mentorship. Mm-hmm. I had probably two to three other guys that were influential as far as unlocking your abilities. They said, man, you can do more.
Right.
You can take this. There's no ceiling. Keep pushing. But they always ended with, be patient.
Yep. Well, that seems like a common thing that we hear when we're having these conversations is patience. And I think every one of us as a 20-year-old, Benji, I know that's not too far, but the rest of us, man, when we were 20, we didn't want to hear patient. I mean, I'm thinking that's like a word. Don't say that around me. I remember I had a guy named Will Kors, who was a great mentor of mine. He said to me one day, he said, Andrew, you just remember Rome wasn't built overnight. And I said, man, that's a good thing I'm not trying to build Rome, because this is going to happen overnight. And so he still teases me today, about the whole patience thing. So that's been a common thing.
Yeah.
Well, I think, I appreciate you taking time to come down here. Your story's awesome. I would love to have you back in the future and learn more. We try not to take too much of anybody's time, but man, you've given us a lot today, and I really appreciate it. I mean,
No, thank you. That was interesting, and appreciate you coming on for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
So that was great. I think I learned a lot today too, and I appreciate you guys watching. Big shout out again to Experience Ag and Land Pros for sponsoring this and getting Jordan out here for us to talk about this, and hopefully we'll see you next episode. So thank you.
All right. Thanks.